All right. Welcome back to the Healthy Swag Podcast. I am so excited to have my good friend, Chef Brian Lewis, on today. What's up, man?
Oh, everything is good. Great to be here. Great to see you again. Great to be with you. Excited about what we got to talk about.
Yes, yes. When did we meet? We met like, was it a couple years ago?
Yeah, it's been about almost 2 years, about 18 months. Yeah.
Okay, okay. And I call you a good friend because when we first met, like just kindred spirits and we really connected. Actually, we probably should talk about how we met because
Yeah.
it's a kind of a crazy story. Your father was a part of a book club, and I had a good friend of mine who started the book club, and he name dropped your dad. And this was his recruiting tool to get guys to get involved with his book club. He's like, "Hey, listen, we got people from all over the globe, men, and we got the ambassador from South Africa on here, Delano Lewis, and I'm like, oh, okay, So he got me and joined the club, and it was a great book club. It still is. And I got a chance to know your father that way. So I knew him before I knew you.
Yep. Yeah.
Then he was having some health challenges and he reached out to me and we started talking and just talking about family, and he was talking about his boys, and I was talking about mine, and we were just sort of sharing stories, and he mentioned you because I told him that my son liked to cook. And he's like, "Oh man, I got my son Brian is a chef in Florida." And I'm like, "Oh wow, like we ought to connect them." And so that's kind of how I found out about you. And I called you initially just wanting to connect you with my son so that he could have mentor someone to talk to who's been in the industry, give him the ins and outs. Man, we just struck up a friendship right off the bat.
Yeah, we did. We
You
did.
remember that?
Yes, sir. Yeah, everything happens for a reson. So it all
Definitely.
it all worked out. And we still trying to change the world. So
Yeah, man. We were going in. I mean, we've had several just like felt like hour conversations at least about our passions and what inspires us. And I think we're both visionaries, we're both creative. So I think, just sort of a natural fit. But man, let me stop right now and just introduce yourself to people who may not be familiar with you, your background, your training, kind of your arc of your career, and just let people know what you're passionate about.
yeah, well, like you had mentioned, Chef Brian, Brian Lewis, reside now in Florida, was born and raised in DC. And so I spent a good portion, well, the first half of my culinary career was in DC. I knew probably sophomore year of high school. I was playing a lot of sports. I was into music too, so a little bit of piano and things of that nature. And then I just knew that there was some artistic things within me that actually also played out onto the football field and other things. So I could see that there was kind of this, I needed to do something that was gonna kind of put me on stage, but also I wanted to think outside of the box. So I had started cooking with my mom when I was about 5 or 6, but just basic things like brownies. And I remember the big jump was making my first pot of chili. I think I was 11 or 12 years old. And
Oh, okay.
by the time I was a sophomore in high school, I knew there were things, I'll put it to you this way. There were some things I knew I did not want to do. And one of them was I did not want to have what they called a job. I
Mm.
wanted to have a passion, or I wanted to develop a passion, or live in my passion. And so my thought process was always, well, what is that? What can I do where I can get up and go and do something that I love? I was pretty much aware then that it wasn't going to be pro football. That took
What
some.
what what position did you play?
I was a tailback, and then I was a cornerback.
Okay.
Yeah,
A
yeah.
corner or quarterback?
Corner. Yeah,
Oh, okay. Okay. My oldest son's a cornerback. Okay, good, good.
yeah. So I was real. I was fast. So that was my thing, and so I just I had coaches telling me I could go to Division 2, Division 3, this, that, and the other, and I was like, I don't know if I want to just go all that route. So, and I wasn't really into what came with that because I knew if I made that step, it was going to be, you got to get in the books, and I had no problem with any of that, but I wanted to make sure I could find something where if I was going to put my head in the books, that I was going to love every minute of it. and
Mm,
not try to find myself through that process. So
mm,
I knew cooking was something, and I didn't know any. I mean, I remember sitting down talking to my mother and my father and talking about, they come up with, there's trade schools out there. And I'm like, oh, really? And they're like, yeah, you can go to culinary school. You can cut through the chase. You can just do that.
hmm.
And man, that just opened up a whole nother world for me. And
Wow.
so I actually graduated high school a year early. I just had enough credits. And so
Wow.
I just said, I'm out. And so I took about 8 months off, worked in a restaurant, a pretty high-end restaurant in DC, got accepted to culinary school in Baltimore, Maryland in 1982, graduated in 83. It was a 1 year accelerated program, 2,500 hours. It's pretty intense. Went from 7 in the morning to about 5:30 in the evening. And then I had a part-time job from 7 to 11. So it was
Oh my
was
goodness.
it was wild.
Yes.
But oh, to be young again, right? So
Yes, yes, yes. Now, I thought now that was a part of the story I did not know actually, because I know you trained overseas as well.
yeah, well, here's what happened. Very interesting story. So when I went to culinary school, there was no Food Network. There was no, I mean, chefs were not really celebrated by any means. There were
Hmm.
only five accredited culinary schools in the country.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Today there are over 300.
Okay.
So in the late 80s, I got an opportunity through some connections through some family friends who owned a very, very high class Italian restaurant outside of DC. And this gentleman who owned the restaurant had reached out to me personally and said, if you're interested, I can get you an apprenticeship at one of the finest hotels in the world. And they don't normally accept Americans. They don't think Americans are serious about food. And so I
Hmm.
said, I'm in. And the reason I was in was because I didn't feel my degree held that cachet anymore. I mean, it was
Mm.
still there, but with the industry was getting saturated. I mean, everybody wanted to be a celebrity chef and nobody was really doing. So I said, you know what? I want to get what I would consider my equivalent of a master's. And so that's what I did. So I went over, studied overseas, got my apprenticeship, master's apprenticeship certificate. And man, that was an experience like no other.
You said overseas, specifically what it was in
It,
Europe,
I,
right?
yeah, I was in Italy. Yeah.
Italy. Okay, okay.
I was in northern
Oh, that's
Italy,
right. That's right.
uh,
Yes.
the Villa d'Este Hotel, one of the leading hotels of the world. I'm in Lake Como, Italy, about 20 kilometers from the border of Switzerland. So it was an amazing experience.
That is, that is, that is. Yeah, I missed that initially, but yeah, that is incredible. So that was a year, or how long was that?
That no, that was also pretty quick. That accelerated. The Villa d'Este was for 4 months, and then I did another 4 months at another restaurant owned by a Michelin star chef in Bologna, which
Okay.
unbelievable. And I lived on their property, and man, you talk about, I mean, I was a little shocked to begin with, the whole outhouse thing, and just, I mean, it was a huge farm, but the restaurant was on the farm, and he was a five-star
Wow.
restaurant. I mean, it was a Michelin star. And so people
Wow.
would pay, I mean, all kinds of money to show up. And the kitchen wasn't any bigger than you would find in a regular home kitchen. But what he taught me was just unreal. So it was two different experiences. I was in the hotel experience and then a very home, very, very, it was just me and him and about two other people. It was a fascinating experience. In fact,
That's incredible.
I reached out to him. I saw he's still going strong. Igles Corelli, Chef Igles Corelli. He's on YouTube. And so I reached out to him and he got back to me. So, but that was a while ago. But
That's incredible. What an incredible experience, man. Not too many brothers are having that experience, I will tell you that.
yeah,
That like sets you apart right away.
absolutely.
My goodness. And then I know that you brought your talents back to the States and you opened up a restaurant, correct? Or
Yeah, yeah. I came
yes.
back to the States and then opened up my first restaurant in DC. It's about 15 blocks from the White House, actually, right on Pennsylvania Avenue.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
What was
And
it called?
it was called Beezer's, which is a nickname of mine since I was a child. And
Ah,
so where
okay.
the name came from, I think it was a combination of the fact that I was highly allergic to bees growing up.
Okay.
Of course, I was always called B since childhood. In fact, my brothers and everybody in the family still calls me B. So So Beezer's was just kind of like an extension of that, and so it was called Beezer's Fine Dining. Yeah, we had our issues. The food was we got a great review from the Washington Post. We were packed outside, line outside the door. We were very, very busy. But like anybody else, I was only 23.
Oh my goodness gracious.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, man. It was a wake-up
Wow.
call. And
How in the world, hold on, but time out. How in the world at 23 do you get like did you have to put out a loan, get a loan to, and to get that location, I mean,
it was a combination of being very blessed with the connections we had, predominantly through dad. As you had mentioned, he's former U.S. ambassador to South Africa. He's not with us any longer. God rest his soul. But yeah, he was former ambassador of South Africa. Before that, he was president of National Public Radio, and before that, he was president of CNP Telephone, which is Bell Atlantic. So he was in the telecom. And so his career in DC really afforded him with just massive connections.
oh yeah, yeah.
So with that, we were able to get a lot of people to invest, and then I found the property was an old Mexican restaurant that was going out of business. I happened to just be going by there. I walked in, I said, what are you guys doing? They said, well, we don't know, and got the name of the person that was the owner of the property, and one thing led to another. I was very aggressive back then, man. And so
Yeah.
we put it together. Yeah, yeah.
That's incredible. But you said you had issues though, and
It's a tough business, and being so young and knowing the back of the house as I did, but not really understanding the front of the house and how easy it is to be stolen from, it's tough. I think may have mentioned to you before at one time or another that this was during the 87. We had that big stock market crash in 87. So the restaurant
yes.
business really, everything was crumbling around us. And so as a family, we kind of said, you know what, let's take a break and let's freeze on it. So it was a rough day for me being a young man and my
Yeah,
first, entrepreneurial thing. And so it was tough. I write about it in my blog. I wrote a book about it, and man, it was tough. But
I bet. I bet. How'd you bounce back? How'd you rebound? Because this wasn't your first one. You did others.
yeah, afterwards, yeah, yeah. So, it was I took a couple months off. I just had my first child with my wife, so
Oh wow.
everything was
Hold
kind
on, hold
of
on. So when did the marriage come into
uh
place?
there the marriage came in. I got married very young as well. I got married 21, so I got married in 85.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it
That's
was
young.
married the girl next door, my childhood sweetheart. We grew up together, dated when we were from 15 years old on, so and
Gotcha.
yeah.
Okay.
So, but yeah, we just had our first child, and so it was just time to kind of get back into that realm of life and just take a break. And so it was I believe God had a plan, and it was all good. And so, even though
It's
I was
probably good for you too, because
yeah,
having a young family, I'm sure the restaurant consumed a lot of your time and energy.
100%. It was
Yeah.
24/7,
Yeah.
and it was rough. So it was a good break, and I didn't know I needed it as much as I did, but I definitely
Hmm.
needed to take a deep breath and get back to life and see what else is out there. And so I did. From there, I just did a lot of catering jobs, kind of hired myself out, kind of freelanced. I didn't want to be in a restaurant anymore. I wanted to kind of get away from that, but I did want to cook. So I
Hmm.
did a lot of freelance catering, which allowed me to work 3 days a week possibly and make good
Nice.
money, and not have to be strapped to that 60-hour week.
Hmm.
So I did that on all the way up until we decided to make a move and get out of the city completely and move to Florida. And so I've been here since 1990,
Okay.
and then opened another restaurant here many, many years afterwards. So we didn't, I opened my second restaurant in 2004.
Oh wow, that's a big break.
Yeah, it was quite a break. Yeah. So yeah, it was a big break, which I think I needed too. I learned a lot in that time, a lot about life in general, a lot about, marriage, a lot about health, wellness, and mental health, and just
Mm.
a lot of things. And so I needed to really just kind of take a step back and see what was going on. And life is life can be really, really difficult. And, you and I have talked about this, and I don't mind sharing this, but, I ended up getting a divorce. And between the time we moved here and the time I opened the second restaurant, I had three more children. So I have four, two boys and two girls. And two of the girls still live here. My youngest son now is in South Carolina, and then my oldest son is in San Diego. So,
Oh,
uh,
wow. We'll spread out a
but
little
and
bit.
then their mom is probably lives about 10 minutes away from me, and we're still thick as thieves, close as ever. I mean, that never changed, which is a blessing.
That is a blessing. That doesn't always happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's wonderful. So
And you got
so
grandkids too,
yeah, I
right?
got one grandchild. Yeah,
Oh, just one. Okay. Okay.
okay.
Okay. Good deal.
Grandson. He's about 18 months old. So
That's a beautiful thing to see your legacy passed down.
yeah, absolutely,
Yes, yes, another
absolutely.
Lewis.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep,
So
yep. We got a few more years before we experience that. So we're gonna take our time on that one. But
yeah, no rush, no rush.
yes, yes, man, what a remarkable journey. Now, so tell me about this second restaurant you opened, and was it still along the same lines as the first one, or did you just change it up completely?
Changed it
And
up completely.
yeah.
Learned a lot about the business. This was in 2004, as I mentioned, and I had always been enamored with barbecue. And so that came
Mm.
from my grandfather, my mom's father. His name was Herman T. Jones. And every summer growing up, I used to go to Houston, Texas with my brother, and we would spend 6 weeks and just to hang out with our grandparents. And I learned so much from my grandfather because my birthday is on the 3rd of July. And so on the 4th, he would always have this huge barbecue and smoke all these meats. And he'd invite anybody strangers, people he didn't know, come on in, and
Yeah,
we had this
mercy.
big
Wow.
backyard, man. And it was just a party. And I'll never forget it. And year after year after year. And I used to watch him dry rub these meats and smoke these meats. And
Mm,
so I
mm.
mentioned earlier about, my love for cooking for my mom, but I'd be remiss to not talk about how much I learned from my grandfather. I mean, he just,
Yes.
and so I decided that I wanted to pay homage to him, and I opened a restaurant called Herman T's Smokehouse. And it was
Ah.
a kind of a upscale barbecue, but it was the real deal, man. We smoked meats for 18, 20 hours.
Ooh, like the
I've
fall
written
off
a
the
beer.
bone.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Made our own sauce, man. It was extremely successful. We were the first barbecue restaurant in this area that delivered. So we had about
Oh,
6 or 7 drivers out on the weekends, and man, we were moving. Um,
wow. Wow. That
it
sounds
was
amazing. And how long did you have that?
well, hey, another great story about life. So we were rolling along, man, and in 2008, again, we had a crash. What is it with these
Mm.
stock markets, man? So everything around us was crumbling, including myself. So
Oh
let me
boy.
just tell you, my
Wow.
health just dropped. I had come to the terms that I was an alcoholic. And so I decided through some counseling and through family support, in particular my father, who happened to be in town when I basically just collapsed. Things don't happen by mistake, man.
No, not at all.
And
Mm.
so he called my mom, and within 24 hours, all my brothers were here. I have three brothers, my mother, my father, and missing the word here.
Yeah.
Anyway, another person came, and they convinced me to go to rehab.
Your wife came as well, right? Or
Yeah, she
no?
came as well.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah.
And so
So that sounds like a major intervention.
intervention, that's the word I look for. An interventionist was there. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
Uh,
Wow. Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, since we're going there, that's remarkable. Like how tell me about that journey with the alcohol and when did you realize you had a problem?
well, I knew I was always a big drinker, but I always attributed that to be kind of associated with being in the restaurant business. And it is. I mean, the business is so unique, especially in the kitchens. It's an incredibly unique experience because you meet every single type of person there is on the planet.
Hmm.
and with every type of background and with every type of issue and non-issue, from criminal or former criminals, and just people with homeless people, people with that have addiction problems, different languages. It's a melting pot by all means. It's really a you get a real identity of the world.
Hmm.
And so I always enjoyed that. But it was a tremendous wake-up call. I knew that I probably was drinking too much, but I was what they call a functioning alcoholic. So I mean, I was up early in the mornings and I came home late at night, and I never missed a beat. I was always working,
Wow.
working, 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 working.
When
And
did, but when did it start? When did you start with with the drinking? Did it start pretty early in your
yes,
20s?
yeah, I started drinking consistently every day, probably my first year of culinary school. So I was probably 17, 18 years old.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. And
Wow.
and then it got very, very aggressive in my late 30s, mid 30s, late 30s, and I was 44 when I went to rehab. So I'm 17 years, almost 17 years now,
Have mercy.
sober. So
Oh, congratulations,
yeah, man.
man.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. Thank God, man. That's incredible. Like the fact that you could be that successful and functional and be drinking it. Like what was your typical day like when you drank when you were in your the highest point?
As far as alcohol
Hmm.
consumption,
Yeah.
okay. And I'm going to tell you, and this is not hyperbole, is not exaggeration. So I'm
Uh-oh.
going to tell you what happens when I always had a high tolerance, but when I stopped drinking, I was drinking, I would get up, I'd have a shot of vodka that would just get me out of bed. I'd buy the little airport bottles and I'd have them
Hmm.
in my little side nightstand.
Hmm.
I'd have a shot before I got out of bed. That actually got me out of bed.
Mm.
And
Okay.
then by between 10 and noon, I'd start drinking beer. I'd probably have 6 or 8 beers between noon and 4. And then
Hmm.
at 4, I'd leave the restaurant. I'd come home. Restaurant was only 5 minutes from my house. So I would
Hmm.
come home, take a nap.
You would walk home?
No, 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 no. I'd have one of those drivers from the drive me home.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
I
okay,
didn't. That was one thing I never did.
okay.
I always said no. I never want to. That was almost fooling myself. I was like, well, if I'm smart enough not to drink and drive, then I'm smart enough to not stop drinking, right? That kind of gave
Gotcha.
me that false sense of
Mm,
you're good, you're good, you're good.
wow.
I'd have
Mm,
one of the drivers drive me home and say, pick me up in an hour
mhm,
or 2 hours or whatever. And I always come back for the night shift in the restaurant. But I would come home, take a nap for 35, 40 minutes, whatever, and then get up, and then I would get into the white wine. And I would probably between 6 and 1 or 2 in the morning drink what would be I used to drink the big bottles, Woodbridge Chardonnay, man. I see in the store today, and I'm like, I get
Mm.
like shaking a little bit. But
Gives
I
you a
would
little
down two
tingling.
bottles of those.
Okay.
2 bottles.
Wow. Two bottles, big bottles.
Two bottles.
Mercy.
Yeah. So you got vodka, beer, 2 bottles of wine. And when I went to rehab, the doctor said, you got a
Jeez.
liver of an 80-year-old. Someone,
Oh, I bet.
yeah, yeah.
Oh my goodness gracious.
And
Now, like even today, has your liver recovered?
oh, he reconstitutes. Yeah, by the time I left rehab, when
Okay.
yeah, they said, you're on your way, you're
Oh,
good.
that's great. Oh
So yeah,
my goodness.
I, you know,
Wow.
thank God for the body being able to do that because
Yes, Lord have mercy. Have mercy. Wow. So what do you attribute to your success of sobriety? Like what is the secret for you other than, having the intervention, having great family support, it sounds like you have. What did you say like mentally,
yeah,
like
that's a
and
great
even
question.
spiritually? Like what is sustaining you?
Great question. And I'll preface this by saying that I think everyone has to find their own. I don't poo-poo anybody that does a certain thing, whether you are, in the rooms, which we call them AA or whatever, or whether
Mhm,
you are in the church ministry, or whether you are just doing Bible study by yourself, or whether you're just meditating, however, whatever works for you
mhm,
to stay sober today is what matters. And for me, to answer your question precisely, what is a combination of all of them. I started off going into the rooms and enjoyed that for a while, but decided it wasn't quite for me
mm,
because they always say, if if you enter the room, if you leave the room angry or more unhappy than when you walked in, then you got to find a different avenue. And that's kind of what was happening for me. Other
Huh.
people have different experiences, but
Why,
uh,
what made you react that way? What made you angry?
well, the truth about rooms, AA or any type of room that brings a bunch of people in to heal and to talk about where they are in the program. The truth about it is that if you are an attentive listener, as I am, you're going to spend an hour listening to some real horror stories, and it can be really, really taxing on the brain as far as positivity. And
Hmm.
so, to me, I used to leave there kind of feeling, wow, yeah. I mean, for some people, it lifts them up. It's like they
Hmm.
feel they're joined, you know. But I always felt, I don't really want to be in a room for an hour and kind of be in a downer mood. I applaud people for speaking because that's what helps. You got to get it out, right? So
Right.
they're in the right
Right.
place, but for me to hear it over and over and over and over again just kind of beat me up. And so I said,
Mm.
let me back up, because what you don't want to do is go in the rooms and then start to fake it to make it, and then you go out and have a drink, and then
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't want to go down that route. So
Wow. That's fascinating. I've never heard anyone say that being in that room was a downer. You kind of think that, you have that camaraderie that you share, you're uplifted because you're not alone, that sort of thing. But for you, it's actually a downer.
yeah, well, I mean, it took about 4 years. I was in for 4 years,
Okay.
for about 4 years. But after a while, when you become what I would call a veteran, a guy, woman,
Hmm.
whatever, whoever you are, and again, to each his own.
Yeah.
This is my story. I'm not, mad at anybody. And I know several people who still find great success in the
Hmm.
rooms, and I think that's fantastic. So,
Absolutely.
but for me, it was just, the way my brain operated. I said I needed something else. So I started to meditate, some Bible study, and then I've always had a therapist. So mental
That's that.
health, man,
Yeah,
it's
that's that. I want to go there because, normally people drink it's to mask something or to, deal with pain. And it's something internal, like, and unless you do therapy, do that deep work, to discover what is the source. Why do I feel the need to? What is in me that's missing? Where do I need to grow in order to move past this? I know you said they say once you are, you're always, but I feel like if people did the work to understand themselves more, like what even led to that. So I'm curious to hear that mental health piece, and you're trying to figure things out, like why did you ever come with the answer as to why that was an issue for you?
I don't know the deep, deep seated answer, but I can tell you for sure that this probably was inevitable based on going back and remembering who I was and how I was as a child. So just to give you some insight, we lived over in Africa. My dad was director of the Peace Corps. So I was in Uganda and Nigeria, 3, 4, and 5 years old. And so I remember that very vividly. The brain is very active then. It's obviously growing, but I mean, you remember a lot. And
Hmm.
I spoke fluent Swahili. I mean, just
Wow.
so it was a fascinating time. But I also remember the fear of a lot of things. So I was always a very timid child, and just I was afraid to fly. I was afraid to be on a boat. I was afraid to be in cars for a long time. I didn't really like to meet strangers. Crowds didn't really work for me. And so then from leaving, when we got back from Africa, I went to Montessori school, which I think is the greatest education in the world, personally,
Yeah.
because you immediately learn how to think outside the box. But Montessori school only goes to sixth grade. So seventh and eighth grade, and then all of high school, I was in these traditional parochial style high schools. I had never sat in a desk before. I had never seen a
Hmm.
chalkboard before.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so this was like, I mean, shock to me. And of
Hmm.
course, I was, just this amazing student that knew so much at such a young age, because Montessori school teaches you, and basically by playing certain games and doing, everything is interactive. So I mean, I knew
Hmm.
how a bank operated at 8 years old.
Wow.
I mean,
Yeah.
just crazy stuff like that. When I got to high school, it was totally different. They wanted all this, you had to come up with these answers and this, that, and the other. And it was just like, I was intimidated by all of this. And I went inward and just kind of shut down. I'll never forget, I was at a party. I was probably 16 years old, maybe 15. And I was this introvert, and somebody had some beers. I had one beer, and they always say, you never forget your first taste, man. And it turned me into, I love to dance at home, but never out in
Hmm.
public. And I was
Hmm.
dancing at this party, and, I wasn't drunk.
Yeah.
What it did to me is it brought me out of that shell. And I will never forget that feeling of not being afraid of my shadow.
Hmm.
And so that continued on. And to this day, it's interesting because if you see me even right now on camera, people will say, well, he's a very outspoken, he loves the camera, he loves to talk to people. I do.
You
But
do.
if
You look.
but
You do a great job.
but if you turn the camera off, you're gonna I go into my own little shell. And there are a lot of people like that. There are a lot of musicians that are like that. They're introverts. And
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
when they hit the stage, the lights come on, they become this other personality.
That's
And what
interesting.
therapy did for me is it taught me that other personality could come out,
Hmm.
that inner child could come out and not be afraid without having alcohol produce that. And so
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
what I have learned step by step, day by
Hmm.
day,
Hmm.
year by year on how to achieve. And it's
Wow.
been a blessing to be able to
Yes.
still have both sides of me. I can still be the quiet
Yes.
Brian to myself, and I don't have any problem being by myself. I don't have any problem entertaining myself. I don't have any problem just reading and relaxing. So taking a walk or even going to a restaurant by myself, I have no
Hmm.
problem with any of that.
Hmm.
But I've also learned now to interact with other people without getting a boost from a substance. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
been a great blessing.
Oh, that's a breakthrough, honestly.
Yes.
And I just did this self-assessment. It talked about it's the saboteur assessment. And it talks about your strengths and how, depending on whether or not you're operating in fear or you're operating in love, how your strengths can turn into your weaknesses
Yeah.
and
Wow.
can sabotage you. I'll send it to you. It's fascinating. It'd be interesting to
Yeah.
see what your profile is. I sent it to my whole family. My wife, she took it yesterday or today, and we're like the complete opposite. It's funny. I could have we probably could have predicted that, but yeah, it's amazing how fear drives us in such a way. And I can only imagine. I'm not a psychologist, but I could see the introverted Brian, having to be on all the time at his restaurant, and perform and be that host and whatever. And that may have been not your comfort zone. And so that was a way to kind of get loose and get live and be able to perform when you needed to.
Yeah.
And
Hey, listen,
yes, that's deep.
I can take it back to the football days, man. When I was in Pop Warner, I mean, even in all the way to the high school. I mean, these coaches would look at me sideways. I walk, who's this guy? He can't play. And as soon as the whistle blew, man, they're like, oh my
There
God,
it is. Yes, yes, yes,
who's that?
yes.
You
But
know?
the beautiful thing is that you said is that you don't have to rely on a substance in order to be what you want to be. Like, you can find it within yourself. You don't, with the right tools in the therapy, you can. And a substance really, and I'm talking this to my boys as well, it really inhibits your growth. It stunts your growth because you're hiding something, you're covering something up that needs to grow, and you'll never get to that other side unless you go through that pain of those growing pains, really. So that's remarkable. You were able to do that and come on the other side in 17 years sober. That's, man, I need an applause button. That's incredible, man. But man, thank you for sharing that. That's very personal. But I know we don't go through things just for ourselves. I don't believe that at all. And so someone hearing this, hearing your story, it probably resonates with someone. And so they will be blessed by your story, by your testimony. So thank you for that.